Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Tonight, we're going to show you why Senator Joe Manchin could be the most powerful man in Washington right now. I'll explain why and why what he has now hinted he's unprepared to do could really derail the Biden agenda. Also, an update when it comes to the case against Matt Gaetz. We're going to learn what prosecutors may have just done in Florida, flipping someone to cooperate with their investigation into a possible sex trafficking ring that could be very bad news for the Florida congressman. Plus, more emotional and impactful testimony in the trial of Derek Chauvin today. We're going to show you some of the key moments, including a doctor who took the stand and why his testimony is being called devastating for the defense. But we begin this evening with the disturbing rise in hate crimes, which is continuing to plague the Asian American community. The NYPD, they have formed a task force to catch people in the act, and earlier this week, they nabbed a woman at a nail salon near Chinatown in Manhattan. That woman stormed in, berated, threatened the workers. Then she went outside and yelled at an Asian person on the street, but that person was an undercover police officer. And that's right on the heels of this horrific bias crime. It's become all too familiar. It was captured by a surveillance camera in Midtown Manhattan in broad daylight. It shows a large man punching and kicking without provocation a 65-year-old Asian American woman while he yells slurs at her. At the end of the video, you can see the security guard at that building shutting the door, doing nothing to help the victim. He has been fired. So was the doorman. The suspect has since been arrested. And out in Queens, also in New York City, which has a very large Asian American population, this woman was sent to the hospital after yet another unprovoked attack when a man assaulted her while she was waiting in a line outside of a bakery. And I could go on all day, unfortunately, with horrific bias crimes caught on video that are all happening in major cities across our country. The problem, it is not going away. In fact, it's getting worse. A new study says their overall numbers decreased by 7% in those major cities last year, but during that same period, attacks against Asian Americans soared by 150%. And another group that tracks these crimes says there were nearly 4,000 incidents against that community over the past year, and that number is likely vastly underreported. The numbers, they tell a disturbing story, but now I want to put a human face on this, and for that, I want you to take a listen to Lee Wong. He's an elected official in Westchester, Ohio, explaining why he is just as American as anyone else in this country.
People question my patriotism, that I don't look American enough. They could not get over this face. I want to show you something. I want to tell you, because I'm not afraid. I don't have to live in fear, intimidation, or insults. I'm 69 years old, and I'm going to show you what patriotism, the questions about patriotism looks like. Here is my proof. This is sustained through my service in the U.S. military. Now, is this patriot enough?
And on the federal level, Congresswoman Grace Meng of New York has introduced new legislation to deal with these hate crimes. I'm going to be speaking with her in a minute, but first, take a listen to her comments. And these were delivered during a recent congressional hearing when she called out a Republican colleague who is against her bill. He was using the free speech argument as his rationale for why he does not support her cause.
I want to go back to something that Mr. Roy said earlier. Your president and your party and your colleagues can talk about issues with any other country that you want, but you don't have to do it by putting a bullseye on the back of Asian Americans across this country, on our grandparents, on our kids. This hearing was to address the hurt and pain of our community and to find solutions, and we will not let you take our voice away from us.
Congresswoman Meng, she's also become a target herself. Her office, they decided to share the voicemails that they've been receiving, and I warn you, they are disturbing to hear.
I'm calling about the Karate Kid virus. or the Kung Fu virus or the whatever came from Asia. It's not racist. It's the truth. Filthy people.
Hey, you look like a Chinese virus, or maybe Kung Flu, or maybe Wuhan. You look like a Wuhan. I'll say what I want. Chinese virus, Chinese virus, Chinese virus, Kung Flu, you Kung Flu, you. You don't tell me what to say, you.
Unbelievable. I want to now bring the Congresswoman in. Congressman, thank you for the time. We just showed some of the horrific scenes that have been playing out in recent months with the attacks on folks in the Asian community, and also some of those disgusting voicemails that were even left in your office. As best you can, explain the palpable fear of parents being afraid to let their kids play outside, or adults worried that their seniors, parents, they don't want them to go out, concerned about loved ones. Just how palpable is the fear right now?
Well, thank you for having me and for covering this issue. This has actually been a reality for much of the past year. Aside from the quarantine, many Asian American families have also been telling their parents not to go outside. And in light of recent attacks in recent weeks against the elderly here in New York City and the shootings in Atlanta, people have really hammered down and told their parents, do not go out. Parents are telling their kids, don't go play outside. I know, people have even offered to buy pepper spray and whistles and different tools to protect yourself to their family members.
Congresswoman, has this been going on for a lot longer than the past year, but only now at getting the attention? Or has something really tangibly changed in the last year since COVID's become, a daily reality for all of us?
I mean, bigotry towards Asian Americans has always been a problem. Most of it has been in the form of verbal sorts of attacks. I would say that in recent months and in recent weeks, especially, we've had this added layer of violence and even to the point of death, as we saw in Atlanta. So while it's nothing new, it's a situation that has been getting worse, and the increase in the number of incidents has been alarming.
The obvious question as to why. How much has language like Kung Flu or the China virus that kept getting perpetrated, not just by the former president, but by others in the city you work in, how much of that has contributed to this?
Well, words matter, language matters, and especially when you were the president of the United States with a tremendous platform, especially during the beginning and the height of the pandemic, where people didn't know much about this virus and people were scared. They were losing their loved ones, their homes, their jobs. And for the leader of our country at that point to use words when his own cabinet members suggested that he doesn't use those words was really incendiary and really, I think, led to a lot more of these incidents happening across the country.
From a personal level, we showed one of the scenes, a woman in your district just shoved violently to the ground for absolutely no reason. The disgusting messages that were left where people felt that they were being deprived of being bigots because they wanted to say what they wanted to say. What's this been like for you personally?
It's been hard to take. I've been really scared for people, but also it's a stark reminder for me as an Asian American how Asians have been treated either as invisible or seen as foreigners and outsiders for much of our lives, even though people like me were born here. We've grown up with constant questioning of where we learned English, where we come from, really, where do we come from, and being told to go back to wherever country around the world. And so this is something that we are actually really accustomed to. But I think that, right now it's important that people are speaking up. And what's even more heartening is that there are so many people and so many leaders from beyond the Asian American communities who are speaking up in solidarity with us.
And you, along with Congressman Andy Kim, you went down to Georgia, and you've been as vocal as anyone in Congress about what's gone on the last year. I played a clip of a lawmaker at a state level who stood up and literally took off his shirt and showed the scars he bore while fighting for this country in Vietnam. And the fact, and he said it, that long before COVID, he had to prove his Americanism, if you will, even though he spent his life defending this country. How much of, in addition to the ugliness and the violence, the fact that you have to prove your Americanism, I got to imagine that's one of the most disheartening things about this horrible past year.
Definitely. And I think that it's sad that someone like him, who is a veteran and who has served our country, had to do something and had to show his physical scars like that. But it is something that is really true for so many Asian Americans. People look at us and don't think we are American. People look at us and think that we are perpetual outsiders. We are from somewhere else. And when I went down to Atlanta and I got the chance to speak with some of the children, the families of the victims, I actually said thank you to them, because I said that their mom's stories, the stories of the first generation of immigrants who've come to this country, worked hard, sacrificed so much for their families. Those are the stories of so many people, including Asian Americans, and their stories have made certain that Asian American stories are seen as American stories also.
In the past year, you've done more than just talked about this. You had spoke a year ago on the floor, and you got a resolution passed in the fall. You've worked both in D.C. as well as also in your district on this issue. And now you've got a hate crimes bill. Talk about what that intends to do and the support you believe is there or isn't there on Capitol Hill.
Sure. We're pushing legislation that we hope will be passed in the upcoming weeks. Legislation that would provide more funding to our local community organizations who have literally been on the front lines of fighting this pandemic, providing dedicated personnel and resources at the Department of Justice so we can streamline the review of these sorts of incidents, and to also find ways to make it easier for victims to report these incidents. It's hard. There are a lot of obstacles to people being willing to come forward and report these incidents. And finally, to provide an educational component for those who have ultimately been convicted of hate crimes. We want to focus on the educational piece of that.
Well, I'm really glad you gave us a few minutes. You've been talking as loud as anyone on this issue, and I wish you continued success. And know that there's a lot of folks out there who know this is as un-American as anything could be, what's been going on here, and hopefully they know that this is not what most of us believe. But thank you, Congresswoman. I appreciate the time.
Thank you so much.
And up next, we're going to explain why Senator Joe Manchin could be the most powerful lawmaker in Washington right now. I'll also show you how the West Virginia Democrat could have a huge impact on many of the most important issues this country's facing.